Next debate, so can I ask all members not staying for that debate to leave as quietly as they can? This, of course, is a 30-minute debate, so there will be no opportunity for the member leading this debate to wind up at the end. But I call Sarah Olney to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve under your the government has committed to resetting our relationship with the EU, and that the Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary are actively engaging to build trust and rebuild relations with our European neighbours through meetings with the European Commission and the Foreign Affairs Council. The Liberal Democrats want to forge a new partnership with our European neighbours built on cooperation, not confrontation, and move towards a new comprehensive agreement. But a crucial step in this process is rebuilding confidence by agreeing partnerships and associations to help restore prosperity and opportunities for British people. With the new Trump administration in Washington, the government is rightly looking to build a closer defence and security agreement with Europe. European officials, however, are insisting that these agreements come in tandem with other partnerships, including a youth mobility scheme. And I would ask the Minister for his response to an article published this morning in the Financial Times stating that the EU has made it clear that a youth mobility scheme is vital to any broader reset with the UK, including security and defence. Providing opportunities to young people should be at the heart of government policy, and Liberal Democrats believe that establishing a youth mobility scheme would not only offer huge benefits to young people, but it would also have a broader range of benefits, including strengthening cultural, social and economic links between the EU and the UK. I'll give way to my friend from South Devon and then to the honourable gentleman from Strangford.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. The government talks a lot about growth being crucial for restoring the public finances. Would my honourable friend agree that in sectors like, for example, hospitality, very important in my own constituency of South Devon, they are really struggling through lack of staff, and if we could restore a youth movement deal, we would have lots of enthusiastic European youngsters coming to the UK to learn English and help boost productivity in that sector? I thank my honourable friend for her contribution. She's absolutely right. There are so many vacancies across our hospitality and tourism sectors, and a youth mobility scheme could be instrumental in helping us to fill them. I'll give way to the gentleman from Strangford.
Thank the Honourable for giving way. She's a very thoughtful MP, always trying to find the ways forward, and I welcome that as well. That's all about solutions. But whilst I believe in neighbourly, friendly relations and affording young people opportunity, does the Honourable Lady not agree with the concerns that I have and those MPs in Northern Ireland have, that whilst the EU continues to hold Northern Ireland to ransom by our packages and business deliveries, we must see resolution to that if we're trying to find a positive way forward, and the consideration can be given to any further changes then to the youth mobility scheme, which I understand the very logic of it. Let's support it.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments and also his very nice words. I totally understand the issues around the specific circumstances in Northern Ireland, and all I would say is that instituting a youth mobility scheme would go a long way to improving relations with the EU, and I think that would unlock some of the other issues that we are experiencing. We already have youth mobility schemes in place with 13 countries, including Australia, New Zealand and Canada. So why don't we have it with EU countries? It would once again allow young people across the UK to be able to spend time with our nearest neighbours without having to navigate Brexit red tape. It's a youth mobility scheme with the EU that would open up opportunities for British young people to learn new skills, languages and cultures, and bring all of that back with them to benefit our economy and our society. As the government knows, I'm happy to give way.
I thank my friend for giving way, and I welcome the interest of the Liberal Democrats in youth mobility. Those of us who bought their first album recognise that one of the challenges here is to get the right deal for British workers. Does she agree with me that the deal that was offered last year, which would have only seen British workers being able to go to one country under the scheme, wasn't the right one for this country, and therefore if we are to have a youth mobility scheme, we need to renegotiate what's being offered?
I thank the member for Walthamstow for giving way. Not sure what she means by the last album. However, what we're talking about is a comprehensive agreement. The EU have already indicated that they would be willing to discuss. Of course, we shouldn't be entering into agreements that are not to our advantage. But as the government knows, a youth mobility scheme would not lead to a return to freedom of movement. After all, youth mobility visas under the terms of the existing scheme are limited in duration, and the number of young people who are eligible is capped. So delivering such a scheme would provide a return on investment in the form of soft power that was never seemingly factored into the approach of the previous Conservative government. The scheme that the Liberal Democrats are proposing is familiar, it is tried and tested, and it allows those aged 18 to 30 to live, work and study in the countries involved for a set period. The advantages of a youth mobility scheme, however, go far beyond just extending opportunities which many of us here will have taken for granted in our own youth to a new generation of young people. The wholly inadequate deal with the EU, negotiated by the previous Conservative government, has done enormous damage to British businesses. We've seen soaring import costs, increased workforce shortages and reams of red tape creating huge barriers to growth. Exports by small businesses have dropped by 30%, and 20,000 small firms across the UK have stopped all exports to the EU. The UK is currently facing acute labour shortages in sectors such as hospitality, the arts, entertainment and retail, and these are exactly the kinds of jobs that young people visiting the UK for a few years might take on.
Would my honourable friend give way?
With pleasure.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Would she agree with me that one of the advantages of the Erasmus scheme was that it provided funding so that people from disadvantaged backgrounds could take advantage of that scheme? And would she agree with me that any youth mobility scheme going forward should ensure access to everyone?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. He's absolutely right about the Erasmus programme, and I would just take the opportunity to further remark that our young people, those aged under 30, have really struggled, more I think than other age groups, to overcome the impact of the pandemic and the lockdown and the impact that this had on many of their formative experiences. And the government should therefore be looking for every opportunity to offer the kind of experiences that would have been available to older age groups now when they were younger. Young people visiting the UK for a few years might take on some of these jobs in the hospitality sector that I was talking about, whether while studying or immersing themselves in our culture or improving their grasp of our language. And across the country, small and medium-sized businesses are really struggling, and a youth mobility scheme would offer British businesses a real opportunity to address staffing shortages by welcoming young people from EU countries for a limited period, bringing fresh talent and energy to our workforce. With pleasure.
The honourable member for giving way, and does she agree, as has been alluded to by my honourable member for South Devon, for example, that apprenticeships must be a critical feature of any mobility scheme, so that we can not only ensure that those businesses that she describes get the staff that they need in very specific sectors, but also ensure that it is not an elitist scheme that we are producing here?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. I'm passionate about opportunities for young people. That's why I am standing here today to talk about a youth mobility scheme. But there is a whole range of policy interventions that we need to really get behind and push seriously. Apprenticeships is one. Funding for further education more broadly is so important, and looking at barriers to employment, particularly for those from more disadvantaged backgrounds. I very much agree with what he said about apprenticeships. I've heard from stakeholders in the hospitality sector that they would welcome this proposal. The changes to the immigration system implemented in April 2024, increasing the minimum salary threshold for skilled worker visas, shrank the talent pool that hospitality businesses can recruit from, contributing to greater staff shortages. Around 3/4 of hospitality's workforce is filled from within the UK, but international talent has always been attracted to working in the UK due to our pedigree for hospitality and our talent for developing careers. And at a time when recent government decisions at the budget have added to the overall tax burden on hospitality businesses, with many considering whether their business remains viable, we must provide the tools that hospitality businesses need to help them grow so that they can boost the wider economy, including ensuring access to global talent. Now, with pleasure.
I just want to say at the start, I think it's so important to reflect on the fact that we now have a government that is actively saying we want a stronger and closer relationship with the European Union. That's the context in which this debate is being had today. I am personally very sympathetic on a youth mobility scheme with the European Union. We've inherited a lot from the last government that makes little sense, including the fact that we have relationships with Uruguay and Taiwan on youth mobility, but not our closest neighbours in the European Union. But what I would also say is that this reset is something that's going to take time, and I completely respect the fact that this government can't give away every part of its negotiating strategy in public at this stage. So congratulate the Honourable Lady on this debate. I think it's an important one, but I also completely understand why we can't have all the details right now.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. I'm glad to hear these words about the Labour government and their commitment to improving our relationships with the European Union. What we would like to see on our side of the House is some action, and we think that the Youth Mobility Scheme is a valuable and necessary first step, and there is no reason why we can't crack on and do that now. The government has made it clear that their number one priority is economic growth, and if anyone was in any doubt about that, I understand the Chancellor has been making a speech on that this very morning. But any proposal that might involve our European neighbours in contributing to boosting growth is dismissed. The Youth Mobility Scheme is a pragmatic and mutually beneficial proposal which will benefit the UK economy and the labour market in the long term. With pleasure.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for giving way. In 2016, the Home Office said that youth mobility visa holders contribute an average of £7,600 to the Exchequer's coffer every year. That amounts to more than £10,000 today. Given that there is economic benefit to a youth mobility scheme, and given that, in my opinion, it's hard to look my children in the eye and tell them that they won't have the freedoms that myself and my parents were able to enjoy, does the honourable member, my honourable friend, agree with me that it's absolutely right and urgent that a youth mobility scheme should be brought forward?
I thank my honourable friend for Mid-Sussex for that intervention, and I think she's absolutely right. In fact, I wish that the Chancellor were here to hear her make that intervention. I gather she's somewhere in Oxfordshire. She's so right to say that actually a youth mobility scheme of this kind would make a real substantial impact on growth in the UK, dare I say, more than the expansion of Heathrow would. And indeed, it would play a very vital role in stimulating the growth which this country so clearly needs, and which we very much support the Chancellor in her call for. In conclusion, Sir Jeremy, rebuilding our relationships with Europe is a fundamental part of making Britain more secure and more prosperous. With the threat of tariffs from the new Trump administration, it has never been more important for our government to break down the barriers to trade that were erected under the previous Conservative government. And by repairing those ties with the EU, we will be able to deal with this unreliable and unpredictable actor in the White House from a position of strength. Introducing a youth mobility scheme between the EU and the UK would send a clear message that this country is serious about supporting our young people and backing British business with the labour force that it needs to grow. The EU has been very clear that they would welcome a youth mobility scheme, and it has now signalled that agreeing to such a scheme will in fact be a necessary step before broader partnerships, including those on defence, will be established. So I urge the government to embark on these negotiations to expand opportunities for young people across the country and acknowledge the broader benefits which a youth mobility scheme could provide. Thank you, Sir Jeremy.
Thank you. I had understood with the consent of the member in charge that Alison Bennett wanted to speak. Does she still wish to do so? She doesn't. I'm grateful. In which case we'll move on to the Minister, who I know is aware we need to finish at 11:30. Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Well, thank you very much. And Sir Jeremy, I should say, first of all, what a pleasure it is to serve under your chairmanship for the first time. And I also start by congratulating the Honourable Lady for Richmond Park on two counts, actually. Firstly, congratulate her on securing this debate. She always holds me to account on European matters at Cabinet Office questions, and I very much welcome the scrutiny that she provides. But I should secondly say congratulations because she has been appointed as the government's trade envoy to North Africa. And the case that she is making today around deepening trade links is, I'm sure, one she will be able to employ in that role as well. And I look forward to her doing that and hearing all about it. I should also say that when I hear her speak about a more cooperative, closer relationship with the European Union, I entirely agree, and that is precisely what the government is seeking to build. I would, however, just introduce one note of caution to her speech. As she can, as the Honourable Lady I'm sure can imagine, I read the Financial Times avidly, as a fine authoritative publication that it is, but I should also say that as we move now towards the first of the UK-EU summits, we haven't actually entered that more intense period of negotiation yet. So perhaps treat sometimes what she reads in the FT with a little bit of caution as to what that negotiation will actually consist of. But I will turn in a moment to the specific issue of youth mobility, but I just want to, for a moment, set in context that in the reset, the EU-UK reset that this government is embarked upon. And I should say, first of all, that I am very pleased with the progress that has been made so far. And I'm sure members will appreciate that in terms of going into this more intense phase of negotiation, it was very important that the new European Commission was in place formally, which it was in December, and that we can now move into this new phase. But I would also say that the government has already been making significant strides forward. Dozens of ministerial visits right across government, working cooperatively with our European counterparts. The Prime Minister, of course, met the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, on the 2nd of October. I was there with them in Brussels when that meeting took place, and they agreed to strengthen the relationship between the EU and the UK, put it on a more solid, stable footing, and then move forward in these discussions towards the first of the summits. The Foreign Secretary attended the Foreign Affairs Council in October. The Chancellor attended the Eurogroup meeting in December, and I have been having frequent meetings and discussions with my counterpart at the Commission, Maroš Šefčovič, and those discussions are, of course, ongoing. We will next week, on the 3rd of February, see the Prime Minister, who has been invited to attend the European Council on Monday by the President of the Council, Antonio Costa, who I met with the Prime Minister at number 10 Downing Street just before Christmas. And as I say, we will then move towards the summit, which we have said, I will in a moment, which we have said will take place in the first half of this year. And I will, of course, give way.
The Minister is, I thank the Minister for giving way. He's giving a very good account of the diary of various ministers. If meetings were a measure of success, then I'm sure we could all say the government is very successful, but it's not. When will we see outcomes from this rapprochement with the EU?
Well, I don't share his kind of downbeat assessment, and neither, by the way, does the European Union. If he looks at what Maroš Šefčovič himself said last week about the relationship with the EU, he said it was definitely in a more positive place, and I would hope he would welcome that. But what we also have is a very cooperative relationship. I mean, I'm also responsible, for example, for the Windsor Framework. The Windsor Framework Task Force is in the new European Union Relations Secretariat at the Cabinet Office in the centre of government, the creation of which I'm sure he would welcome as a prioritisation of this relationship, which is precisely what is being argued for in this debate. And it allows issues, like, take an example of when we first came to office, the issue of dental amalgam in relation to EU regulations on mercury. Under previous administrations, that would have blown up into a significant row, but it didn't. In this new, mature relationship that we have, that was something that was dealt with very pragmatically going forward. And in terms of what he is asking for in terms of concrete progress and deliverables, I'm sure he doesn't have too long to wait until the EU-UK summit to be able to see that starting to take place. So I would just gently say to him both that he should welcome the progress and the constructive relationship that there is. I hope he hasn't got too long to wait for some more concrete outcomes, which are hugely important. Now, as we take forward the discussions on the reset, the discussions fall essentially into three categories, three pillars, if you like. The first is in relation to foreign policy and defence cooperation, a more structured Cooperation, we've already made progress. The Foreign Secretary and the High Representative have already agreed on 6 monthly foreign policy dialogues. That agreement is already in place and we will move further forward on that. Secondly, in terms of the safety of our citizens, on judicial and law enforcement cooperation, again, the member challenges me on concrete progress. We've already increased the National Crime Agency presence at Europol. I visited Europol in opposition, as did Prime Minister, as did the now Prime Minister and the now Home Secretary. And we are determined to work more closely together on serious and organised crime, from the vile crime of people smuggling to issues such as fraud, money laundering, drug trafficking, to ensure that there is nowhere on our continent where criminals can find a place to hide from the force of the law. And thirdly, we will of course look to make significant progress on trade and reducing trade barriers. We were elected on a manifesto with a very firm framework that we wouldn't rejoin the single market or the customs union or go back to freedom of movement. But that manifesto also contained examples of what we wanted to secure, for which we have a mandate from the British people to go and seek to negotiate. I will give way in a moment. From an SPS agreement, which will reduce trade barriers significantly for agriculture and for agri-food products, to mutual recognition of professional qualifications for our services industries, to what we can do to make it so much easier for our touring artists to once again be able to tour around the EU, and indeed for European artists to come here, but also on those aspects that within the Trade and Cooperation Agreement as it stands, we will already have to move forward on negotiation. A very good example of this is energy, where already the Trade and Cooperation Agreement is putting an obligation on the UK and the EU to look at how they operate their emissions trading schemes. So there is a substantial agenda that the government will be taking forward, and of course I'll give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. And since the election, I've seen and heard lots of evidence of more conversations happening between the UK and the EU than certainly did over the previous few years. So I accept what you're saying about a rapprochement and a more positive engagement. You say that the government is keen to increase trade.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, lady. You is me. She means he, in terms of the Minister.
Apologies. Apologies, Jeremy. Where was I? Yes, the government saying that they want to increase trade with the European Union. Could the Minister comment on how helpful he thinks it is when suggestions are put forward by the European Union, like last week we had a suggestion of a pan-European Mediterranean customs agreement which could benefit the just-in-time supply trade and complex manufacturing in this country, and this sort of instant dismissal of it by the government. Would you like to comment on how helpful you think that is?
Well, firstly, it's not I disagree with the Honourable Lady's description of it as a customs agreement. That's not quite how PEM operates, or is indeed meant to operate. Secondly, I would observe that in terms of various proposals, various things that come forward and comment, of course you would expect the government to refer to its manifesto commitments for which we have a mandate. But what I have always said constructively is that, of course, within our red lines, we will always listen to proposals that the EU puts forward. That was the message the government sent out. And I think I would also observe that my very constructive, positive relationship with Maroš Šefčovič is evidence of actually proposals going between us that are being very constructively received on both sides. And don't take my word for it. Have a look at Maroš Šefčovič's own interview last week, where he was asked about his relationship with me and how the relationship is going. And he was very clear about what a positive different place is in. So the proof is in what is being said on both sides. And further, I mean, I'm interested in this press on progress, because I did take the time before coming to this debate to have a look at the Liberal Democrat manifesto at the last election, which included a 4-step process. So I think I would gently say that if we were doing a 4-step process, we might be taking significantly longer than the process. I will give way to the Honourable Lady in a moment. Significantly longer than periods that has been taken. And I will, of course, give way.
I'm grateful to the Minister for Giving way, I would observe that our four-step process was around a much more comprehensive programme of engagement with the EU than just what we're calling for today, which is a youth mobility scheme. And secondly, I would put it to the Minister that since our manifesto was published back in June last year, there's been substantial change in the global arena in terms of trade and defence with the re-election of President Trump in Washington. So naturally the environment has moved on since then, and that is why we are now renewing and intensifying our calls for greater cooperation with the European Union, because we think that the issue is so much more pressing.
Well, I'd firstly just say when she talks about a comprehensive programme of engagement, that is precisely what the government has been doing. She's certainly right to observe that, of course, world circumstances change and alter, and I'm sure that will be the case in the years ahead as well. But what is not going to change is the government's prioritisation in terms of deepening our trade links with the European Union. And it is really important to say as well that it is of mutual benefit. It is of benefit to the United Kingdom. It is of benefit to the European Union that we together move forward on this agenda. And that is precisely what will happen over the next few months. And I give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I know more than most how much work he's been putting into this issue. And can I say, as those of us who were talking about rejoining the pan-European, it already exists, it's not a bespoke scheme, and also what we could do with youth mobility, it would be very helpful to understand from the Minister's perspective, because there are a lot of issues here to balance about what would be in the best interests of the British economy and British growth. So can I bring him back to that point? It is wonderful to have UK leaders in Europe who do not have a question as to whether we are friend or foe to our colleagues in Europe when there are so many challenges in the world. But we also need to speak up for the British interests. I just wonder if he could set out a bit more what he considers those to be on these issues.
Yes, and my honourable friend makes a really powerful point, and I think it was a particularly low moment for the country when one of its prime ministers couldn't answer a question as to whether the French president was a friend or foe. Our NATO ally, huge and deep ties. I mean, that we ever reached that point, I think, was frankly disgraceful. But we're not in that position anymore. We are very clear with our European friends and partners that it's a constructive and positive relationship that we will make a closer one in the years ahead, and that is hugely important. And she makes a really powerful point as well about national interest, because our national interest, and indeed the interests of European economies, they go hand in hand. This is not some sort of zero-sum game. This is a negotiation, a set of discussions where both sides can mutually benefit, whether it is in, like, just take for example an SPS agreement, which is one of our specific manifesto pledges to go and seek negotiate. That works for both sides. That is reducing barriers for both sides. That is good for businesses in the agricultural sector on the European continent. It is good for the agricultural sector here in Britain. Cultural exchanges, good again for both sides. Mutual recognition of professional qualification in services. It isn't just about our brilliant services exports, it is about those services that we can get from the European Union as well. Now, I'm conscious that these very short Westminster Hall debates, Sir Jeremy, that we're coming to the last few moments. But of course, people-to-people contacts are hugely important. There's no doubt about that. We have obviously the previous government eased the position regarding school trips, particularly with France. We have just indicated our reinvestment in the Turing scheme going forward. There are also numerous deep people-to-people links that exist right across the United Kingdom. Now, the Honourable Lady will know, because we've had this exchange across the House of Commons chamber many times, that the plans that the government set out at the election don't have youth mobility as part of them. We've said it's a very clear red line. We won't go back to freedom of movement. But I approach these negotiations with the European Union going forward in a constructive spirit. I, of course, will put forward and advocate for our national interest. It's, of course, for the EU to come forward with their negotiating position, and who knows whether points in the Financial Times may or may not be accurate on this matter. But I look forward to these negotiations. This is going to be a really positive period in relationships between the UK and the EU. I'm sure we can come back with the deliverables that are being asked for by colleagues of the Honourable Lady. And I'm very grateful, Sir Jeremy, for your chairmanship of this session.
I'm grateful also to the Minister and to everyone who's contributed to this debate. The question, therefore, is that this House has considered the potential merits of a youth mobility scheme between the UK and the EU. As many are as that opinion, say aye. Have the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The sitting is suspended until 2:30 this afternoon.